All right, let's jump right into this explainer with a brutal, but honestly, incredibly necessary challenge. For just one day, I want you to stop trying to prove how rational you are. Just stop. Instead, we're going to use Dan Ariely's brilliant book, The Upside of Irrationality, as an X-ray. Seriously, the upside of irrationality is the perfect tool to read the hidden forces operating right beneath your choices. In The Upside of Irrationality, Dan Ariely helps us uncover what we've been building, the true architecture of the self. We love to think of ourselves as perfectly logical beings making clean choices, right? But the reality is, our minds are dealing with a very messy body. So, let's strip away the illusion of pure logic and look at what is actually driving us.
So here's a bit of a reality slap for you. Think about how often you over-explain your decisions. We tend to frame this as just being thorough, or seeking clarity, but it's not true clarity. It is actually an externalized authority loop, and it's driven entirely by fear. You're basically outsourcing your judgment to a crowd that isn't even in the room. You're building this elaborate legal defense because deep down, you feel like an invisible judge is constantly evaluating your every single move.
What's really fascinating about this core concept, and why the upside of irrationality hits so hard, is that it brings our daily choices into the glaring light of the lab. It reveals that motives like pride, fatigue, the need for status, and fear, they aren't just minor footnotes to our grand plans. They are the actual structural engine of our strategy. The high-functioning mind desperately wants every desire to speak like corporate policy. But honestly, that's just theater. The irrational forces are what actually move the needle.
Just look at the contrast here. The old model of thinking demands that every single motive has to testify in a mental courtroom. Every desire is suspect, every choice needs an ironclad alibi. It's exhausting. But true intellectual refinement, it treats reason as scaffolding. It doesn't shame the building, it simply holds the work in place while the complex, sometimes messy, human structure grows.
Now this brings us to a wound we pretty much all carry, especially in the workplace. It's what's called the meaning premium. People will endure incredible amounts of effort, but only when they can see the visible significance of what they're building. There's this amazing experiment where people were paid to build Lego Bionicles. When their work was dismantled right in front of them as soon as they finished, their motivation just completely tanked. And that was even when they were getting paid the exact same amount to build the next one. When your effort isn't connected to a visible purpose, it literally makes your labor feel stolen.
I want you to think of a building with a hidden steel beam. You can't replace that beam with a fresh coat of paint. You can't replace it with a motivational speech. Meaning is that beam. It's load-bearing. Measuring pure output while treating a person like a replaceable cog creates this hollow effort. And the real tragedy? We falsely blame that resulting emptiness on a lack of personal willpower, when in reality, the structure simply collapsed because we removed the load-bearing wall of meaning.
Take a second and place this lens right into your own memory. Think of a time, maybe even recently, when you defended a project, a strategy, or a choice way longer than it objectively deserved. Genuinely ask yourself, what was that invisible critic inside your head actually feeding on during that long delay? Were you really protecting the option itself, or were you protecting the person you hoped that option proved you were?
In those moments, you weren't seeking truth. You were just seeking immunity. It's a desperate, exhausting need to be acquitted by an absent court. You were over-intellectualizing a basic human feeling. But here's the thing. That feeling isn't a tyrant. It's just a messenger.
As we move deeper, we hit what's known as the ownership trap, which is perfectly captured by the IKEA effect. We inherently place more value on things we've built with our own two hands. It's why you absolutely refuse to throw away that slightly crooked bookshelf you spent 3 hours building with a tiny hex wrench. Our sheer labor bonds our personal identity to the outcome. This isn't just cute pride. In business and strategy, it dresses up dangerous sunk cost blindness as refined taste.
And this brilliantly illustrates why this matters so much. Ownership can make error feel incredibly intimate. Because we've bled for a project, letting it go feels like amputating a part of ourselves. Builders love their lopsided origami frogs, while strangers wouldn't pay a dime for them. This is exactly why a sound strategy must have objective, predefined exit criteria before our labor creates an irrational, emotional loyalty to the project. You've got to separate the feeling of, I made it, from the reality of, it actually works.
Look at the stark contrast in how we handle this. The old paradigm treats irrationality as noise, something to be removed, corrected, or apologized for. But the harder, truer paradigm, it treats irrationality as a highly valuable signal. Instead of amputating the messy human parts, we must read the pressure. Those biases and illogical leaps, they show us exactly where the self is seeking meaning, status, and safety.
Let's do another quick check-in. Think of a specific moment when you absolutely demanded certainty before you took a step. I want you to really ask yourself, was your strict demand for clean, perfect logic in that moment actual strategic brilliance? Or was it just a delayed flinch? You know, a defense mechanism to avoid taking a risk, being seen, and potentially being shamed for an error.
That hesitation, it was a signal. True refinement comes from learning to read these load paths, rather than crushing the pride or fear that created them. If fear is blocking your action, don't praise your own paralysis by calling it being cautious. Read the signal. Give that fear a small, safe first move to make instead.
So let's pivot. This brings us to a crucial turn: hedonic adaptation and the hot state. Think about grocery shopping on an empty stomach versus after a huge meal. When you're starving, you buy half the snack aisle, right? When we're in a hot state, swamped by anger, longing, humiliation, or extreme hunger, our sense of time completely shortens. Our feelings start making long-term forecasts while our body's essentially under heavy chemical weather.
Because a hot state writes bad law. We constantly make a massive mistake, treating our peak emotional state as permanent evidence. The fire you feel in a hot state is temporary, but the emails you send, the bridges you burn, and the strategies you launch in that state, yeah, those become permanent policy.
So how do we actually fix this? Not with willpower. Willpower vanishes under pressure. Instead of relying on discipline in the moment, build this physical architecture before the heat ever arrives. First, create a mandatory door for delay before taking irreversible actions. Second, require a door for outside counsel. And third, run a small reversible test. The human body respects these 3 physical boundaries way more than it respects noble slogans about staying calm.
How does this all build into a cohesive life strategy? Well, if you constantly use your raw intellect to police your own motives and suppress your nature, you will definitely achieve strict obedience. But you will completely destroy your own freedom. You'll live a life that looks perfectly rational on paper, but feels entirely dead inside. Designing environments and trusting architecture, however, leads to actual freedom.
True freedom means having a refined mind that doesn't need every single feeling to be acquitted in that imaginary courtroom. It just needs every force to be properly placed. Put pride where it protects your craft. Put emotion where it reveals the stakes.
As we reach our resolution here, remember that this invisible criticism creates a needless, utterly exhausting defense. We have to stop using our capacity for reason simply to prosecute ourselves. That judge you are so desperately trying to impress or appease, they aren't even there.
Think of your irrational self not as a broken machine, but as a cracked compass resting on a desk. The needle might tremble. It might not point to true north with absolute, clean perfection, but it is still readable, and it still reveals the magnetic field of your life. It shows you what you care about, what you fear, and what you deeply value.
The absolutely crucial takeaway is this: reason actually improves when it stops trying to act like a tyrant ruling over your emotions. Let the inner engineer answer the inner judge. Design better rooms rather than fighting better arguments. Continue the internal transformation at upgowise.com. I'll leave you with this thought. If your strict logic has been perfectly defending your deepest wounds, what incredible things might you build if you finally gave your irrational forces a wiser frame to work within?